Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our debate discussion for the House seat that represents the four towns in our district here: Manchester, Arlington, most of Sunderland, and Sandgate. My name is Andrew McKeever. I'm the editor of the Manchester Journal. It's my honor and privilege to serve as your moderator tonight for our debate discussion. I also want to thank at the outset Burr Burton Academy for making the facility here tonight available to us. This debate and discussion is sponsored by Burr Burton Academy and the Manchester Journal, and it's our pleasure to do so. I'm going to introduce our candidates in just a moment, but first just let me point out that there are two seats in this district. In 2012, a reapportionment of the State House changed the former division where we had one representative for Manchester and one representative for Arlington, Sunderland, and Sandgate, and also a small part of West Rupert. Now we have a two-seat district where the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and most of Sunderland will be represented by two representatives in the State House. Just to go over the ground rules real quick, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask two rounds of questions to the candidates seated here at the table. They'll each get 2 minutes to answer the question. Each one of the other three candidates will then get 1 minute to respond to the question. We'll go around the table twice, and then we're going to turn it over to you folks in the audience to ask questions. I thought about having someone walk around with cards and writing out questions, but I think just for the sake of simplicity, we'll just ask you to kind of stand up, state your name, and just belt it on out. And I'll try and repeat the question if I feel like folks didn't have a chance to hear it clearly. After that, we'll go to closing statements from all the folks who are here in front of us, and wrap it up. Going to shoot for maybe finishing up by around 8:30 or so. So, most of you, I'm sure, know the four candidates who are here with us tonight, but just by way of background and introduction, I'll start from my right here. Steve Berry, who is seated to the far right, started as a young pastor in Eden, Vermont, and North Hyde, Vermont. He's a graduate of Johnson State College in Johnson, Vermont, went to Yale University and the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. He has received an honorary doctorate from Piedmont College, the Ralph Bunche Peace Award from the United Nations Association, and a citation from the Mayor of Los Angeles for his work with business leaders and community organizations, and a leadership award for the Habitat for Humanity International. Since his early days in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, Steve has served churches in St. Louis, New York City, Los Angeles, and Manchester, Vermont, and is currently sabbatical minister at Grace Congregational Church in Rutland. Cynthia Browning, who is the sole incumbent office holder, I might add, has served in the House of Representatives since 2007. She went to Bennington College, where she has earned a PhD in economics from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. She taught economics at Bates College, Smith College, and Williams College. She currently works as the executive director of the Battenkill Watershed Alliance and serves on the Arlington Select Board and the Arlington Zoning Board of Adjustment. To my left, we have Judy Livingston, who many of you are familiar with. Judy was born in Boston, grew up in several New England seacoast locations and Hawaii, as the daughter of a military officer, graduated from high school in Darien, Connecticut, and attended the University of Connecticut and George Washington University, Boston Architectural College, and Harvard Graduate School of Design. She was married in 1965 to an Arlington Vermonter and they bought their Manchester home in 1972. She has two children and was mostly a stay-at-home mom. In 1995, she was elected to the Vermont State Legislature and served for 14 years until 2008, and is now seeking election back to the State House after a 6-year hiatus. And last but hardly least is Tony DuPont on my far left, who grew up in Delaware, summered with his grandmother in Craftsbury Common, Vermont, where he did some farm work, earned a degree in economics from Yale University, became a pilot for Pan American Airways, and earned a degree from California Institute of Technology in aeronautics, became a chief advanced design officer with Douglas Aircraft, and then founded his own aerospace design company in 1969, where they designed and built experimental airplanes for the U.S. Defense Department. In 1980 and 81, he was the vice president of Pacific Lighting subsidiary, looking at alternative energy sources, and semi-retired to Vermont in the fall of 2009 and currently lives in Manchester. Before we start our round of questions, I thought it might be a good idea and appropriate to just say thank you to the candidates who are running for office. Running for public office is not an easy thing. It demands a lot of everyone. It's, I think, in my opinion, probably the highest expression of public service that one can give to their community and to their state. So I'd like to all of us give a round of applause to all four of the candidates. And thank you all for running. Okay, here we go. That's if I can find my questions. So, we decided to go in alphabetical order, which means that conveniently Steve Berry and Cynthia Browninger to my right will be the first two folks to get a question. Like I said, they'll each get 2 minutes to answer a question, and everyone then will get 1 minute to respond. Steve, let's talk about affordable housing. That's been identified as one of the big issues here in the community because there's not enough of it, a lot of people think. How, if you were elected to the legislature, how would you try to bring more affordable housing to the town to encourage more young folks, young professionals to be able to afford to live here?
Well, I'm glad you're lobbing an easy question to me right off the bat, Andrew.
I'll have a few others later.
Well, I would say that having worked with Habitat for many years, beginning in the early 1980s, about 9 years after Millard Fuller began, that I've had a sensitivity toward housing and affordable housing, and have worked on many houses personally with Millard, and over the years have been involved with that. Housing is a human right. Affordable housing in our area is not easy, but there have been some inroads, I think, over the last years, making more housing available, at least in the Manchester area. As I go from place to place, there are homes for folks now. But I think that we have to look at housing in the context of the entire issue of wellness of life, of how we view individuals and the importance of persons, particularly in our area, who are service people. If we're going to have nice places to come here where people are served in restaurants and in hotels, then we need to be able to have affordable housing for people so they can live here, and persons who want to come here. I think that the affordable housing issue is going to be something that I think in the future we'll have to pay more attention to. But once again, that's something that the towns and the region need to decide. I think that a lot of the regional impetus should be on how you manage your town, how you manage your region, and how you look at persons in need of housing. And I think that handling it locally is probably a good start to then getting something going in the legislature. So I would urge that town meetings and things such as that, we would talk about affordable housing. But Habitat, I know, is a success, but it's only a drop in the bucket. But every time Habitat puts a new home up, it gives hope to a whole family.
Okay, thank you very much. I should tell you that I'm also being the timekeeper here. I'm very proud of myself for having downloaded this really cool stopwatch app here. I'm not like stuck in the 20th century anymore. So, each of the other three of you will get 1 minute to respond to Steve's answer. Cynthia Browning.
I think that one thing is that the committee on which I serve, House Institutions and Corrections, has been instrumental in funding the Housing and Conservation Board, and they provide sort of startup funds, starter funds to supplement affordable housing programs. I myself, as a member of the Arlington Select Board, supported the Regional Affordable Housing Corporation projects in Arlington. We have several of them, and that's been a very important addition to the affordable housing stock in Arlington. The other thing that I just want to mention, however, and this is a bit touchy, is that the mortgage interest deduction on our income taxes, which I support as a way to facilitate home ownership. But my understanding is right now, you can get a mortgage interest rate deduction if you buy $1 million house and it's a vacation house out of state. I'm not sure that's the best use of our scarce dollars.
Cynthia, we're going to stop you right there.
Thank you.
Hold that thought. You'll have an opportunity to expand that answer later on. But Judy Livingston, you're next. Affordable housing, what should the legislature do?
Well, the first thing I would say is that there are 5 or 6 affordable housing programs in AHS. That's ridiculous. They should be combined, or they should be sorted out so that it makes sense. It's a big expense to the state government for all these programs, and we really need a good, I would say 1, maybe 2 agencies that handle this, and we might have some more money to work with it. I've always voted in support of these programs, but I will tell you also, I would like to encourage the market to get into it, because I had a friend who's a builder, and he bought land up near Burlington, and he was building affordable housing for people to own their own houses. And he bought a large amount of land, and he planned I think 30 or 35 units. And he was stalled so much by regulation that he finally gave up and built 3 very large McMansions. That is the problem we're facing here. The regulatory process prevents the private sector from getting into it.
Okay. Tony, your turn. 1 minute.
Well, I'll take less than a minute. I think that Judy's probably said it all, but that is what we need to do. We need to make it affordable for people to build affordable houses.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to for a question to you, Cynthia. And I may have also added, in case I cut any of you off mid-sentence in one of the answers, if you want to expand on that answer later on in the course of one of the others, feel free to do that. Well, Cynthia, you got the governor kind of upset with you last session when you complained about the fact that he hadn't come up with a single-payer health care financing plan and filed a lawsuit. So let's assume the governor is reelected and the single-payer plan that he's talked about comes before the legislature in January. Are you philosophically opposed to a single-payer plan, or will you favor it, or is the question around the financing of it?
I've never been ideologically opposed to the concept of a single-payer program. What I have opposed is promising such a program without making it clear how it would be paid for, because I consider that what's called entitlement bias, and it's one of the pitfalls of democracy. And I don't believe it's responsible to promise benefits without making it clear how you're going to pay for them. So I'll be very interested to see the plan whenever it emerges. I would be so interested, I'd like to see it sooner. And it's worth noting that the governor actually does have alternative plans, because the economist he's hired to run regressions has been provided with alternative financing plans. So they have the plans, they're just not sharing it with us, and they don't have the final plan, and I understand how hard this is. That's why it would have been better not to make the promise until you knew how you were going to do it. And I believe that we can make substantial progress on health reform, quality, cost control, and affordability, and equity of paying for it, even if we don't go so far as single payer.
Okay. Judy, 1 minute to reply.
I appreciate Cynthia's approach to this problem. It is a huge problem, and it's a mess. I, in fact, talked to the finance commissioner today about it. He's working on how in the world they can finance this program. Most of us realize that it's going to bankrupt the state, or that's the rumor out there when I talk to people in Montpelier. I will also note that when I put a bill in once, and I will do it again, to ask for, or demand, any program or any legislation that comes to the floor have a fiscal note attached to it as to how much it's going to cost the state to do it.
Okay. Tony?
I'm not philosophically opposed to the single-payer plan, but I don't think it's going to work. So starting from that point of view, I think as it's been discussed, it's going to be more expensive than what we have now. See, if you're going to have a nonprofit insurance company running it, you got the Green Mountain Care Board and all their supporting staff on top of it, so that's an extra cost right there. And my experience with monopolies is that they're inefficient and more expensive. And so it doesn't have the earmarks of success, but we'll wait and see what the governor comes up with.
Okay. Judy?
Hold on.
No,
I'm sorry. Steve, excuse me.
Medicare is the best and most successfully publicly funded health care program in the American system. It works. And so I am very much in favor of universal health care. I think that it is the way to go. I know that we're going to have to find ways to fund it, but we've had bigger problems than this that we have solved. I think that it has to be a #1 priority. I think that there are better ways to go about getting information than to sue the governor. I do think that we need to have transparency, but there are reasons why people sometimes can't give and divulge all the information, particularly when the private insurance companies really hold the reins on so many politicians. And so much of what goes on by big corporations and special interest group sways the day. So I would be absolutely 100% in favor of health care for everyone. Health care should be a human right. It is a human right, and we need to take it seriously. And everyone deserves to be able to afford to see a doctor. It's as simple as that.
My apologies, Steve, for forgetting you.
No, it's okay.
I won't do it again. Okay, Judy, your question. Obviously, one of the big issues, not only here in this district, but around the entire state, is the question of property taxes and education spending. The two are sort of interrelated. And one of the ideas that came up in the legislature towards the end of the session last year was an idea around maybe that the state should form consolidated school districts and consolidated supervisory unions. I was wondering, if you were elected, would you be in favor of a consolidated plan to shrink the number of school districts and supervisory unions? And in particular, would you be in favor of that should one of the schools that involved in our district might be one that would be targeted as being closed?
Well, I served on House Education, and I also, after I was out of the legislature, I was on the State Board of Education. So I've been around and around with this question for a long time, and I can tell you that when you discuss this in the legislature, it alarms the hometown folks. Nobody wants to do this at home. If they voluntarily decide they want to combine with another school, I think that's terrific. We know of several situations where that's happened, and whether they've saved money or improved education, I hope to find out. I think they have. But I'm against mandating it. I am in favor of small schools. I know that goes against everybody who has a fiscal interest in this process. Their ideas are that it would save a lot of money to combine school districts, but my children went to a very small school when we first arrived back in Vermont, and it was a 2-room schoolhouse with 3 grades in each room. It was the best school they ever went to. It was also the community center for the town. So I think there must be a way around this where I really object to the mandating. I don't think that's ever going to work, and many of us have heard from our own townspeople that they really don't want it. So we're not going to do it under those circumstances.
Okay. Tony, you have 1 minute to state your opinion on that.
Okay, well, once again, Judy said it all. I was going to say that in addition to Judy, I have a friend that went to a fine school in Pennsylvania, and then the family moved to Vermont. And she was in a similar school where there was three grades in the room, and she said she got a much better education at that school than she did in the school in Pennsylvania. So I think that consolidation ought to be a choice of the school boards involved. If they see they can save money and they can give the kids a better education, it'll probably happen. If the state mandates, we'd be in trouble.
Okay, Steve.
I think the local school boards should decide on consolidation. And if the school board decides that they don't want to do it, I think that those towns that want to keep it local and fight for that, and that's their right, should pay more. And it's just that simple. If you want something, then you're going to have to fight for it, and then you make the decision to ante up and make sure that you're taken care of. And if you don't like the regionality idea, I think that you don't have to worry about the region. I think that it doesn't mean giving up your local input, but it does mean exercising your right to have a voice as a citizen, and if you aren't engaged, don't gripe about the outcome.
Okay. Cynthia.
I think that the consolidation should be voluntary. It can already happen. Districts can already combine into supervisory unions and make all those kinds of decisions. I think it should be voluntary, and if there are good cases to be made, we need to discuss those matters with the school boards to see if they can agree to those cases. I think you shouldn't overestimate how much cost is related to administration. Most of the cost in education is teachers and staff, not administrators. And whether we ultimately limit the number of teachers or staff, or we limit the rate at which their compensation rises, I see no other way to deal with the rising cost of education. And those are brutal statements, but I think it's important to understand the reality of where we are, and if we want something, we have to be willing to pay for it. I also will point out that the state has used the education fund to balance its own budget by shorting the education fund and by $27 million a year in the transfer in there, and it also uses property tax dollars to meet its goals for current use and income sensitivity. I support both those programs, but they're not education, and they shouldn't be in the education fund. Property tax rates could be down by 30 cents
That's right.
if the state behaved more responsibly.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Absolutely.
Over to you, Tony. One of the issues that's been discussed ad infinitum here in Vermont is how to attract more businesses to the state, how to grow jobs, and how to grow the economy. If you were elected, what ideas would you bring to the legislature around attracting businesses, or to relocate to the state, or to start up here in the state? What are some ideas you would want to be sharing with your colleagues around this?
Well, I think Vermont has a few natural advantages for the kind of business I was in, which is aerospace. And in passing, I'd say aerospace is now bigger in Vermont than dairy, which is a big deal. But anyway, the aerospace and software industries like that are high value added and require well-educated professional people, that the recreational opportunities and the school choice, at least it's available in this district, are big drawing cards to get people to come or to stay. And so those are the advantages. The disadvantages are things that the legislature has put in the way of business, and over time the legislature can take them out. And that's what I would do to my colleagues. I would try to persuade them to try to get energy costs down. Energy cost is a big thing for anything that is manufactured. And we have very high energy costs and programs in place that are going to make them go a lot higher. And the other factor, is, of course, is the famous taxes. And if we can get a handle on the education budget, that would go a long ways toward allowing people to stay here. At least you wouldn't have to pay them exorbitant salaries so they could pay their taxes. And finally, there's a lot of regulations that get in the way, not just of high-tech businesses, but just regular businesses. And a lot of people that I talk to going door to door are very upset about this. They said they would like to hire 2 or 3 people to expand their business, but they feel they can't because of all the regulations they have to comply with. So they just do it themselves, and they're not growing. And almost all new jobs are created by small and growing businesses, and we don't want to tax them and regulate them just when they're getting off the ground. We want to keep our talented kids in the state and attract other talented kids to move here.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Steve, your turn.
Yeah, I think that one of the best ways to do that is to support the local businesses that are already here. And one of the ways is to help, is to lower the taxes that they have to pay, make the already wonderful state more attractive to people young people who might like to come in. New businesses, creative young people will come to Vermont because they love it, but they are worried about how they can make a living. And I think that a major issue is broadband. So I think that a lot of what is going to happen in new businesses and supporting new businesses and the whole business climate is to really pump up broadband so that it is available all over our state. The technologies, maybe even something behind broadband is already happening. So I think that that'll be an incentive, but the local businesses, support them already. There's already great businesses here, and I would urge that that is an attractor for young people coming in and other businesses by seeing that they're treated right. And I would have subsidies, not for big businesses, but for small businesses to help them get off the ground and then to get to the next level.
Okay. Cynthia, your turn.
I think that the best way to foster economic development is for the state to do its job really well, to make sure that the money that's being spent is productive, you're getting bang for the buck, whether it's in broadband expansions or other sorts of activities. I think that the best thing for businesses is low and stable tax rates, but we have a question of if we're going to lower their tax rates, then where is the tax revenue for government going to come from? And I have some ideas about that in terms of tax reform. So I think we need to lower the level of uncertainty for businesses. I think the questions about single payer are part of that. But the state needs to do its job with transportation, education, broadband infrastructure really well. And if that's done, then the private sector will take over. And we won't have to bribe anyone to come here or bribe anyone to stay here, because it will be good, and it will be good for everyone. It will be a level playing field.
Okay. Judy.
Well, we have many problems that prevent businesses from coming into the state. They make decisions at the threshold of the state. They don't even have to come into Vermont to understand the tax situation we have and the fact that there's no transparency with our tax situation. They don't know what they're paying for, and there's absolutely no predictability. A business cannot start or expand without knowing what's going to happen to them for 5 years. I served as the Vice Chair of Commerce for the last 2 years I was in the legislature, and we pushed through as many bills as we could to kind of soften some of these problems. We put together a wonderful bill that offered funds for companies to hire interns so our kids could get educated in certain fields, so we would have an educated labor force to offer companies. We could do something like New York, 10 years of a waiving of all taxes if they first arrive in the state. There are ways to attract businesses. We are not doing them very well, and my motto is the state should just get out of the way.
Okay. Well, we're all doing very well. You're all like staying on point and answering the questions in a timely fashion, and that's fantastic. More time for the audience to ask their questions. So we're going to go through one more round like this. We'll ask 4 questions, and everyone will get a chance to chime in, and then it'll be your folks' turn. So back to you, Steve. One of the big issues, obviously, that has attracted a lot of attention this past year, beginning with the governor's State of the State address in January, is the question of heroin and opiate abuse. It's gotten a lot of attention. It got Vermont certainly on the media spotlight. What is your approach to how should the state deal with this problem? I mean, should we be doing more in terms of treatment, law enforcement? What would be your approach to this issue?
It's such a complex issue, and I can't say that I have all the answers, but I can say that I disagree with Tony, who indicated that he feels that people should just be incarcerated. I think you have to look at, by the way, that's a cost of $50,000 per prisoner, or $158 per day. I think that there are better ways to deal with people who are involved with drugs. But the best way for me to answer that is to say, why not have universal K through preschool? We know that the social behaviors and the problems that occur later on in life happen when you don't catch the problems early with children, and you don't help the parents at an early age. We know that Head Start is a really great program, but there are other programs that have been tracked for many years, one in Chicago, one in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and those are fantastic programs which have not only the care of the children involved, but also the care of the parents. So the parents are brought out of poverty along with the children. They're getting educated along with the children. I think that that's a really smart use of money rather than $50,000 a year to incarcerate someone. And because you have privatized prisons, there's no incentive to not have those cells filled. So I think the approach has to go back to taking a look at the whole family structure in a holistic way, looking at people, looking at what their needs are. In terms of those who have fallen, those people who have gotten into difficulty, I think that those persons we have to try to find ways to rehabilitate them and to help them. The churches do that a lot. People have come to my door for years and years, and I have helped them individually. There are also a network of other service organizations in our area that help people like that, and to keep those doors open and the dialogue between churches, volunteer organizations, and the state open is really, really important, because we can't solve this by ourselves. By the way, this is not the worst place in the world to live with a drug problem. I've been in big cities. This is okay, it's a big problem for Vermont, but if you travel someplace else, it's not so big.
You're out of time.
I know.
Cynthia, 1 minute.
I think that it's important to note that the legislature, in fact, has passed mandated required universal pre-K. So that has already been done. Most districts in the state already did it. There were some that didn't, and they are now required to offer it. The one fly in the ointment is that the state didn't put any more money in the ed fund to pay for it.
Oh, that's a problem.
So, so I think we have made progress in that. I think that we need to be sure that anyone who has a drug problem who wants to get treatment has access to treatment, but we need to hold them accountable for their behavior and their crimes. Too many times the drugs provided for treatment get diverted onto the black market. It's like anything, it's complicated and it's difficult to do. The Department of Corrections has actually worked very hard to try to figure out wraparound services for people with complex mental health and substance abuse problems. It's very, very difficult, and I think Reverend Berry is correct that we need to do more on the corrections side, but it's not for lack of trying. Some of these individuals are very, very difficult to help.
That's right.
Okay. Judy, your turn.
Well, in talking to the police, who are frustrated as to what they call the revolving door of the traffickers. Now, there are two elements to this problem. One is the traffickers who are coming up, and we used to call them pushers when I was a kid. And then we have the addicts, and sometimes the addicts are the traffickers as well. But I would certainly put the traffickers in, punish them in some way, so that there is not this revolving door where they get arraigned and then they're back out on the street the next day. That is not helping the problem. I do believe in the programs to help the addicts. I think that there are programs. I have several friends whose kids went through this and came out the other side and are well, and they're going to be fine. But it takes a major medical push for these kids to be straightened out.
All right, Tony.
Well, my view of this thing is that drug addiction, particularly heroin addiction, is a public health problem. And I still stand behind the idea that we should seriously consider testing everybody that applies for state aid to take a drug test. And if they flunk, not deny them the state aid, which is the approach some other states have taken. And that's questionable constitutionally. But to put them in a successful rehabilitation program, give them a chance to get back on their feet, it's not something that if you're a user, putting you in jail isn't necessarily going to fix it, because unfortunately they can get the stuff in jail too. But Judy has nailed it. We've got to incarcerate the guys that are pushing this stuff. And apparently from the discussion last Friday that that's not happening.
Okay. Cynthia, I guess I want to return to this question of property taxes again a little bit, or taxes in general. It's been a big subject of discussion, not just in the last legislative biennium, but, well, going back quite a ways. And I guess, there was talk, I remember hearing of whether or not we should maybe restructure the income tax to help, let's say, pay for educational spending or other spending that the state may feel necessary to undertake. One of the expressions I often heard was lower the rate and broaden the base, for instance. What are some of your ideas around how the state might restructure the way it taxes citizens? Should we continue to basically kind of stay as we are, or should there be changes to income taxes or sales taxes or other kinds of taxes, in your opinion?
I'm glad you asked me that. The Blue Ribbon Tax Restructure Commission a number of years ago came out with a whole series of reform recommendations, including simplifying the income tax and reducing the rates by eliminating some of the deductions and exemptions and credits. So the idea is that there would be a trade-off. You might enjoy a credit now, but if you end up with a lower rate, you could end up better off or just about the same as you were before. So that was something that came from a legislative appointed commission, and I would continue to want to explore that. The other thing is I would want to link it to the property tax, because of the fact that we have these programs in the education fund that are not education. And every time you support agriculture by providing a subsidy to the farmers' property taxes, you actually end up driving the property tax rate up. Other people have to pay more to make up for what that farmer is not paying. Now, again, I support that program for tax equity, but it's not education. It doesn't belong in the ed fund. It's $50 million. That's 5 cents on the property tax rate. The income sensitivity program is $150 million, and that's 15 cents on the property tax rate. We all need to be sure that people are paying according to their ability to pay, but it would be better to redo the property tax rate and put it on an income tax footing rather than having this kind of backdoor subsidy that just ends up driving up the property tax rate. So I feel that in combination with the shorts where the legislature has shorted the transfer to the ed fund that they should have made, There are legislative actions that have driven up property tax rates, and if we did income tax reform and property tax reform at once, we could end up with a simpler, more effective, and more equitable program. And we might have to have separate programs to achieve some of our policy goals. But the tax system should really be about raising the tax revenue in order to fund government. And when we start trying to manipulate it to support this activity or that activity, sooner or later, there is no tax revenue because you've given it all away. So that's a difficult message. My bill, H-353, has been in the legislature, and I've presented about it to the Ways and Means, and I believe that they are frightened by it.
Okay, we'll have to stop you there. You may have a chance to expand on that answer later. But Judy, over to you. What should this legislature do to restructure taxes, if at all?
Could you repeat the question? I'm a little
Sure.
deaf.
There's been a lot of discussion around how the legislature might change the makeup of taxes, how residents pay for taxes through income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, and so forth. Some ideas have been raised, I think, in the last few years around broadening the base of the income tax, for instance, and lowering the rate. Or conversely, should folks at the higher income level, should they be taxed more? Should they be taxed less? If you were elected, what ideas might you bring to that discussion? Should we raise certain kinds of taxes to pay for things like, for instance, a gas tax, perhaps, to pay for roads and infrastructure repairs? Should we lower other taxes?
All that in 1 minute?
I'll give you 1 minute and 10 seconds. How about that? I'll be nice.
I have a file on just one of those issues. I have a whole file of education funding ideas. Never mind the income tax and some of the others. I will say this. Lowering taxes is very difficult. Once you put a program in place, it never goes away. If you try and remove it, and I'd like to consolidate a lot of programs, the heat factor is a little bit too difficult to deal with. But I will explain taxes to you in a pretty basic way. You understand that income tax is very volatile. It depends on a recession or how the economy is doing or if people have jobs or what's going on. The sales tax is very gentle. People keep buying things. Even when things are bad, they still have to buy things. So that kind of has a wave to it. Property tax is pretty standard. It just works its way along year by year. It's pretty predictable. The state loves it. That's why they asked for the property tax to be in the state's hand. I got that message from Howard Dean directly when I was an innocent freshman, and I went in and I said, Governor, I don't know why you want property tax in the State House. It really works well for each town. He said, because I know I can depend on it. So they're looking for more dependable sources, and I don't have, I have a million ideas. I'm
Okay.
helpless.
Well, you'll have a chance to share some of them perhaps before the night is over. All right, Tony, what are some of your ideas around tax restructuring?
Well, I think that tax simplification is very important. And it's very important for being able to raise the revenue. One way of looking at it, our tax laws, particularly the federal level, are so complicated. We've raised a whole generation of tax sheets. And if it's simple, you know, the government needs X percent of your income and everybody pays that percent. That's extreme, but that would be very easy and easy to understand. And the property tax is a real problem for the reasons we've already discussed, but if we got back somehow to where the school taxes were raised by the town that runs the school, then there would be some real control over expenses, which is something that's lacking right now.
Steve, your turn.
I
remember
think
this time.
Cynthia was really articulate on this issue, and her voice needs to be listened to on this. I believe that the property taxes are too high. I think that the second homeowners get socked with exorbitant taxes, which are unfair. I think that on the other level, property taxes take a bad rap because it's not all redistributed to the education system. You know, it's supposed to be going someplace and it's not going. 30-something% is going elsewhere. I think that that's wrong. I think that the whole system needs to be reevaluated. Act 60 and then Act 68, which was a graduated tax, I think that was put in by the Republicans in 2003, and then the level of it was brought down by the Democrats incrementally, but still passed. I think that that has to be reviewed, and I think that it's unfair burden, particularly on second homeowners who, in our area, are really necessary for our economy. They're our friends. A lot of what happens here depends on them, and they shouldn't be taxed out of our state.
Okay. Okay, Judy, 2 minutes to answer this question. Again, on renewable energy has been a big issue here in our state for quite some time. Wind energy, solar energy. Do you favor continuing to subsidize renewable energy, or having the government extend a helping hand to help industries like solar and wind continue to grow market share and expand and become a bigger part of the state's energy portfolio?
Well, that's another issue that could go on for a couple of hours. We have the cleanest energy portfolio in the country, mainly because we have Hydro-Quebec, which provides us a third, I believe, of our energy. And we also have nuclear power. We used to have our own nuclear power plant, but now we buy nuclear power from New Hampshire instead. But that does not pollute either. We have dams and we have a couple of wood chip plants. And all in all, we have a clean energy portfolio. We couldn't do much better than we're doing now. We don't burn coal, and the only pollutants and particulate we put in the air basically from wood stoves and rubber tires on pavements. So, but the law requires that the utilities provide base load power for the entire year. Base load power has to be as many kilowatts or megawatts that are needed on the worst day of the year. So let's say the 15th of August has been the hottest day of the year for years. So everyone has air conditioners or fans or whatever they have, and that is the highest usage for the whole year. Under that, in those circumstances, the state, the utilities rather, have to provide base load that meets that one-day standard. That is by law. As you know, windmills and solar panels are not base load power. They're intermittent power. Everybody knows that. When the sun shines and the wind blows, that's when we get the power. It's not a well-developed industry quite yet. Everybody also knows that. It takes a lot of power and energy and pollutes a lot to build windmills. And I don't know what goes into building solar panels, although my ex-husband was in the energy business and he did it for a while. But it's complicated. However, if we keep promoting it, but the private sector has to start making money in it. So there's a market in it, and then these things will be perfected. So whether it requires subsidies to get to that level of attraction or not, I don't know. I encourage anything that doesn't pollute, however.
Okay. Tony, your turn.
Well, if the objective is not to put carbon dioxide into the air, what we're doing is not that practical. It takes more energy to make a solar cell than it delivers during its useful lifetime. And most of those cells nowadays are made in China, probably with coal-fired electricity. So we're not putting the CO2 in the air in Vermont, we're putting it in the air in China where the westerly winds can blow it over here. So windmills are not quite in the same category. It takes a lot of energy to make them. I don't know what the story is on how much you put in, how much you get out. But ethanol which is not necessarily a Vermont legislative problem, but you're required by law to have 10% ethanol in your gas tank. And it takes more energy to make a gallon of ethanol than you get when you burn it. So it's something that is actually absorbing energy rather than creating it. So we're burning food to no avail. And so I think the whole idea of subsidizing, quote, clean energy and raising our electricity rates, which are very bad for business, has to be reviewed and probably changed.
Okay, thank you. Steve, your turn.
This is really a climate change issue. This is a major factor that will be affecting our grandchildren. And so we need to look at the whole idea of carbon neutrality. The former Secretary, George Shultz, just spoke at MIT, urging people to take a look at the present regulatory laws and urged that we begin to look at a revenue neutral surcharge on carbon dioxide emissions. He feels that that's going to be a way that we're going to reverse this trend toward climate change that is going to ruin everything. As we stabilize our climate and our oceans and slow down the mass extinction of the species, then we have more hope. It'll put America in a position of leadership if we were to follow this revenue neutral surcharge. All the money comes right back to the state or to the federal government. So people have the charge, but it comes back to the people in form of checks. It will decrease our dependence on foreign oil, substituting low carbon energy made in the U.S., decrease our dependence on foreign oil, and that's a good thing because that's all about national security. And then the transition to clean energy will clean our air of smog and ozone and fine particles, et cetera. So I think that that's the way the state has to go to. We're the greenest state in the country. So
Okay.
why can't we take leadership on this issue, climate change?
Okay, thank you, Steve. Cynthia, your turn.
I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that conservation and efficiency are still the best way to go. The cheapest electricity in terms of money and in terms of carbon dioxide emissions is the electricity or the energy that you do not use. So in terms of our transportation system, in terms of our home heating systems, in terms of other ways in which we use electricity and energy, we need to continue to work on those programs because those are the ones that have the biggest payoff. I particularly support small-scale renewables where people have solar panels on their house or a windmill on their barn, so that they're not dependent on the big utilities. They're actually having some control of their own energy future, and I think that's very important. I don't have a problem with some degree of subsidy for renewables because the oil and gas industries have had subsidies at the federal level for years. So it's a little bit writing the balance, but I think balance is a very important word. And with this idea of having 90% renewable energy sources, I think by, I don't remember if it's 2020 or 2030, I think it's very important to have balance, 2050. Yeah. It's very important to have balance and to go step by step and to give people as much control over their energy future as possible.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Okay, final round of questioning. Tony, I'm going to ask you a question you probably didn't expect. The state of Colorado recently legalized marijuana, and it's been talked about here in the state as perhaps a way to raise more tax revenue to help balance the budget. If you were elected, would you be in favor of that?
I think quick answer is no, but it's really a two-part question. What do you think about legalizing marijuana? Well, it's not legal now, and look what's happening. So legalizing marijuana might be a sensible thing to do, but legalizing it, taxing it, is a bad move because that gives the state a vested interest in having a lot of marijuana users. And marijuana does have some bad effects, particularly on younger people whose brains are still developing. And so the idea, if it was possible to legalize it and without taxation, but maybe with education about the harmful effects, that might make sense.
Okay. Steve, your
I'm a
turn.
definite yes on legalizing marijuana. I tried it, but I didn't help, and that was back in college, and I haven't tried it since. But the reality is that why throw people in jail? And it's a great move that the state of Vermont made in saying people shouldn't be thrown in jail for what should be a misdemeanor. If you want to, we tried prohibition. We really did well with prohibition, and I'm being facetious. I think we need to legalize it. I think that it is much less harmful than alcohol, and I don't think that people should be treated as criminals. Medical marijuana is gives known help to people who are deeply distressed and in huge pain. So I think that the taxes that we get from it should go to the government and to the health care system, and it should not be going to illegally and going to criminals who continue to apply their trade. Regulate it. Make sure that everybody knows what they're getting, not getting stuff that's not healthy for them.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, Cynthia, your turn.
I think that the legislature has commissioned a study of the costs and benefits and revenue of legalizing marijuana, and I'm not prepared to prejudge this issue until I see the results of that study. I understand the arguments about prohibition, but even if the state of Vermont legalizes it, it's still illegal at the federal level at this point in time, and I find that a very difficult contradiction to swallow. I think that we need to be careful that we don't sell this as this is the solution to our revenue problems and just layer a new set of taxes on top of the Baroque system or the Baroquean system that we have now. The same thing with the carbon neutral tax. I'm open to all of those proposals, but it has to make sense, and it has to make sense within a context of tax reform. And we have to do it with our eyes open, because many people who end up on heroin start with marijuana. It's not that if you start with marijuana, you go to heroin necessarily, but many people who end up on heroin start with marijuana. And the last thing I would do would be to encourage that. In terms of sending people to jail for minor marijuana offenses, even before we loosened the laws the last couple of years, that really wasn't happening. When people went to jail, it was for some sort of collateral charge, like assaulting an officer or something like that. They weren't usually sent to jail just for possessing small amounts of marijuana. So while we might want to reconcile what's happening and what the law says, I think it's a mistake to think that many people are incarcerated based on small marijuana offenses. I don't believe that's true.
Thank you, Cynthia. Judy, your turn.
I voted for the medical marijuana bill back when I was in the legislature due to the fact that I had some constituents who were relieved of their pain from various conditions with medical marijuana. It was a matter of compassion. I am dead set against legalizing recreational marijuana, because at the same time I have had a family experience with one of the children in my family who is an addict. And don't anybody tell me that marijuana is not addictive, because it is.
Okay. Well, that completes the first round of questions here from the moderator's podium. Now it's your turn. I guess we'll just do a simple show of hands, and I see one raised up there right away. Oh, there's two. You'll just have to kind of stand up, I guess, and tell us your name. The young lady there, yeah, that you. Yep, you're the one. So just sing it out, and if folks need for me to repeat the question, I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, thanks. My name is Mary Welford, and my question for all four is about gun safety, and whether, just yes or no really, whether each of you would support legislation to expand background checks. So by that I mean for every gun sale, whether it's a private sale or a gun show, there would be a background check? That's my question. Yes or no, whether you would support that legislation?
Yes. Steve Berry? Yes.
I would consider that, but I also think it's very important to enforce the laws that we have right now. But I think keeping guns out of the hands of people who are mentally unstable is essential. And as long as there are sales that are happening that are not background checked, I think that can continue to happen. So I would be willing to consider it.
Judy, I guess it's your turn.
Yes, I would favor background checks. I would also point out, however, that we are the second largest, what should I say, population, not really population, but we have the highest ratio of gun ownership next to North Dakota in the country. And we're number 50 when it comes to gun accidents and crime with guns. So gun training and background checks and letting our kids find out about guns at an early age, because this is a hunting state. So we have to realize that, but I am absolutely supportive of background checks. When I first came to Manchester, kids would take their guns to Burr Burton, put them in the headmaster's room, office, while they went to school, pick them up at the end of the day and go hunting. So there is a hunting culture here we have to be aware of. At the same time, we put regulations on it.
Okay, well, my answer is a flat no. As Judy said, we have probably the lowest crime rate in the nation, and we have reasonable gun laws. If you want an example of the other extreme, go to Chicago, where they have a very high rate of gun violence and the strictest gun laws in the United States. I'm firmly in favor of leaving our gun laws alone.
Okay.
Could I just respond? We've heard statistics about the gun trafficking, the drug trafficking and the gun sales and so on. I think that factors into having background checks. So it's an absolute, strong, unequivocal yes, but the reason for that is because people are coming to the state of Vermont and buying guns, no questions asked. And I think that is not good for Vermont, and I think it's also bad for the people in other states who are on the losing side of some of this bad behavior by people who can get easy guns here in the state of Vermont.
Brad Morrison.
If you are elected, you're going to be returning to a legislature that is very different than when you were there 6 years ago. You're going to be part of a party that is a very small minority in Montpelier. You're going to be caucusing with a small minority party, a party that has limited effectiveness in the legislature as it's currently constituted. My question for you is, how are you going to be able to have an effective voice for Manchester and the surrounding towns if you're part of such a small minority party? And, for example, you are advocating a bill such as Tony DePond has suggested, for example, doing means testing or drug testing for people who are applying for state aid. How are you going to be effective in a democratically controlled legislature when you're part of a party that is in such a small minority?
Did everyone hear the question? I just wondered, did everyone hear the question before we go further? Yes? Okay.
I can certainly answer the minority question. I was in the minority most of my 14 years in the legislature. It's not an unusual position for me to be in, and I found that after I had been there for 6 years, better after 8 years, I had friends in both parties. The important thing about working in a legislature with your colleagues is to establish trust. And once people, my colleagues in the House, realized, and in the Senate, that they could depend on me. If I said I was going to support a bill, I would do so. If for some reason something happened in that bill that changed and I could no longer support it, I would go to them before the vote and say, I'm sorry, I can't support it. Establishing trust, letting your colleagues know where you stand, goes a long way to making friends on other sides of the aisle. And there were progressives as well as Democrats on the other side of the aisle. I was able to put a lot of bills together with bipartisan support. I had a bipartisan committee. Whatever committee I was on was always bipartisan. And yet we were able to get bills out with my name on it. I've even taken my name off bills to get the bill to pass. So it's not as impossible as you present it. I understand it's going to be an uphill battle. I'm ready to face it.
Yes, the gentleman in the aisle there. Oh, Ralph Coleman.
This is for everybody, but I'll start out with Steve, because you made a very passionate and strong statement at the beginning about your favoring single payer. It's a two-part question. When you go to buy something, presumably you know what you're buying and what it's going to do for you. At this point, if the government does know what will be provided by single payer, they certainly haven't told anybody about it, and whether they know what it is or not, I have no idea. But how can you put together a budget for something that you haven't yet determined what it will be? That's the first part of the question. The second part is this. We have the second smallest population of any state in the Union. Wyoming is just a little bit smaller than we are. We've got 627,000 people in our state. There are somewhere around 100,000 children that don't pay taxes. 25% of our population has coverage, healthcare coverage under Medicaid. So that's about somewhere around 150,000. I think there's somewhere in the vicinity of 70,000 on Medicare. They don't pay the healthcare for insurance. And you've got ERISA, which covers, I don't know how many, but a substantial number of people in the workforce. And then you've got your veterans benefits under TRICARE. So that roughly half the people in this state don't pay any insurance for their health care. The governor has said that it will cost somewhere, or they are saying that it will cost somewhere between 2.2 and 2.5 billion with a B dollars to put in single payer. That's about twice the amount that we're paying in all taxes now in the state. We're paying somewhat over $2 billion now. So it would effectively double. How are half the people in this state, roughly 300,000 people, going to be able to afford to pay somewhere around between $2.2 and $2.5 billion in taxes to cover the costs of single payer?
Thanks, Ralph. Of course, I can't answer that because I don't know what all the facts and figures are going to be, and I think that it's clear that you have to go through your budgets and make sure that you can afford it. But the $2.6 billion that you've already indicated is, in fact, what we're paying now. But if I were to go to a privatized plan, or if I go to a privatized plan, and I have an appendicitis, and I go to Hospital A, and it cost me $1,500, and the same procedure cost me $150,000. In the next Hospital B, there's something really broken and wrong about the system. If you manufacture a pill for 32 cents or a nickel and charge somebody $60 for that pill, there's something wrong with that system. So I am very interested in a universal health system that is a graduated system where everyone pays in. No one is let off the hook. Everyone pays into the system on a graduated scale. So if you're person X and you make $15,000 a year, you pay something in. If you're making $90,000, you pay something in, graduated. And then if you're making $3 million, you're paying something else in. But everyone pays into the system, and the rest is taken care of by however the government decides to do that, state, federal. And so it is very much like a Medicare system. It is like what people over 65 get, and that's what I would think that we should do.
First of all, I think that what Reverend Barry just said is very important to see that we're not going to have taxes on top of the premiums we're already paying. They're going to replace them. So it's really important to see that, so it doesn't look worse than it is. I think that the problem is it's not clear who's going to pay more and who's going to pay less. One of my concerns is actually unionized workers, our teachers and our state employees who have spent years building up healthcare systems and paying less than many of the rest of us. And my understanding is that if they go into single payer as it's currently envisioned, bearing in mind that we don't actually know what it's envisioned, they may actually get less good coverage and pay more than they are now. So this is really a matter of concern for me, because I don't want to make Vermonters worse off, particularly not working Vermonters. I don't know, maybe we'll work all of this out, but it really matters. When you speak about Medicare, most people purchase a supplemental policy to supplement what Medicare doesn't cover. That may have to be true for Green Mountain Care as well. We may not all be getting the same coverage because some of us may want to buy more. So it's not that it's impossible, but is it worth it? And are there ways we can make progress towards our goals of universal coverage without redoing the entire system? And until we've been provided with the plans, it's really hard to answer that question, because we don't really know, other than there's a certain floor in the Affordable Care Act that you have to cover at least 80%. There's a certain floor there, and there are certain criteria, but they're still arguing about what's going to be covered and what's not going to be covered. So I think that what we need to do is we need to see the plans and then make the decision as to whether this is the way to go to Vermonters.
Any further comment on this subject? Okay. Jerry?
Jerry Scott, Wolf, Manchester. This is a question for Tony DuPont. I don't know you, and I knew nothing about you. So I did what any red-blooded American boy would do, even though I'm a senior citizen. I got on the internet, and I found some things that are a little perturbing to me, and I was wondering if you could clear it up, particularly as it relates to the issue of climate change and your attitude towards regulation. What I found on the internet is that, and also in your press releases and stuff, you said that you could bring your business expertise to Vermont. You had a company called DuPont Aerospace in California, which over a 20-year period collected $67 million from the federal government, which is taxpayer money. That money was cut off at the end of the congressional investigation because you had not, or the company had not, produced proof of concept after 20 years or a viable model. I think your airplane, and by the way, let me preface this by saying it's the nature of science and technological innovation that failures are fine, all right? That's part of the process. But the thing got up there, I'm not an engineer, 45 seconds tethered, and something happened that didn't work out. So the funding was cut off. In the hearings, there was testimony, I went through the transcripts, that accused your company of mismanagement, not having the proper materials, facilities, and a large amount of turnover in the engineering department. At the same time, you donated $36,000 to Duncan Hunter, the congressman, and later supported his aborted presidential campaign, and you gave a significant amount of money to Congressman Cox, both of whom were instrumental in creating earmarks which got your company that funding.
Excuse me, Jerry.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, so...
Well, make it short, I can bring it home right now. Somebody is trying to do economic development in this town, and they want to build a hotel. You have said that you have filed, I think, an appeal on 250. It's claiming that the water quality might be affected in Battenkill. That's fine. And if you're right, that should be okay. What I want to know is, how do you square your financial support for Congressmen Hunter and Cox and your donations to the Koch brothers, Americans for Prosperity, all of whom are on record as climate change deniers and anti-environmental regulators?
Holy cow. Well, to answer part of your question, one result of the hearing was it said if the airplane could hover for 30 seconds, the $60-odd million would have been a worthwhile investment. So a couple of months after the hearing, it did hover, which was the objective of the program. So I'll clear the record on that. As far as Chris Cox worked for me when he was in college, so I knew him well. He's a very, very sound guy. And the same can be said for Duncan Hunter. Duncan was a ranger in Vietnam. He supported our airplane not because we donated to his campaign, because our donations over 20 years are peanuts compared to General Dynamics and all the other big defense contractors. I supported Duncan because he was a good man, and Duncan supported the airplane because he saw too many crashed helicopters during his service in Vietnam. He wanted something better. And during the hearing, he produced a chart that said, okay, here's the helicopter, and it goes 120 knots and goes so far. And here's the V-22, and it goes 220 knots. And here's the DP-2 that goes 500 knots and goes twice as far. And he said, this is what the Defense Department has to offer beyond the V-22, and turned the thing over, and it was a blank page. So what Duncan and Chris were doing is they were trying to nurture some new technology that the big boys would never do on their own. And I think that experience in trying to get something that difficult going against the tide is good experience for getting things done in Vermont, where it's not easy, at least not right now. As far as the hotel goes, we're not necessarily against building the hotel. We just would be much happier if they connected to the town sewer system instead of running a pretty serious risk of dumping their sewage partially treated into the Battenkill. And in addition to that, the town permit violated a lot of the town's own zoning laws, which they think ought to be enforced. So it's not we're necessarily against the hotel, we just want to do it right.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and then we'd like to have a round of closing statements from each of the candidates. And I see more than one hand out there. Roland, you've had your hand up, and then Bill, I'll go to you. If we can keep the questions of kind of tight and concise, that would be terrific.
Claude Campbell. I had the pleasure of frolicking in Montpelier before Judy. I never ran out of hearing of needs, and I've all heard of you how you would spend money. The problem has always been that there are insufficient funds to meet all the needs. And in the event that we needed to cut the budget, I would be interested in finding out from each one of these candidates what area of the budget or how they would look at it on what might need to be reduced, or at least we've heard about increased spending, but if we had to reduce the budget, where would you look?
Is that question directed at any particular candidate? All four. Okay. Who wants to go first? Cynthia.
I think that one of the most unfortunate things about our current situation is when you look at the projections, you have revenue growing at a certain constant rate, and you have expenditures growing at a constant rate, and there's a gap of $70 million forever. So that means we have a structural budget deficit. Even when the economy is in good shape, income tax revenues are relatively high, we still have a deficit. I have been voting against the spending bills and the tax bills that the Democrats put forward, despite the fact that I'm voting against my own party, because I didn't think they would work. And given the current outcry about property taxes and the fact that in July, the first month of the fiscal year, the administration had to redo the budget, I think that my concerns have been confirmed. Now, one of the things that the legislature has toyed with is something called results-based accounting. And what that does is it says, okay, you have a program, what is the performance standard, what is the goal, how well is it meeting that goal, and you compare different programs. It's kind of like what Judy was saying about combining different housing programs. You need to find out where you're going to get the most bang for the buck. There's always infinite needs, but we need to use the tax revenue in the most effective way. In addition, we need to look at these tax expenditures, the credits, deductions, and exemptions, many of them extremely valid, but they now cost like $1.3 billion. It's like a whole shadow budget of tax expenditures that don't go through the regular budget process. And I actually succeeded in getting a pilot program to look at this in the budget this past session, but then it was taken out in the Senate. So I have been working on this issue of how do you deal with so many needs and limited resources, and you have to look at how effective what you're doing is. You can't just say this is a good thing to do. You have to look at it compared to other things. And I believe I've already been doing that, and I will continue to do that if I'm reelected.
I don't believe I said anything about spending more money. I don't think I proposed anything, but maybe I did. But the main thing is I would propose in adding an agency that did nothing but monitor the expenditures of other agencies. For instance, the AHS, which is Human Services, that's welfare, is almost half of our budget. It's 44% of our budget, the state budget. That's food stamps and housing and all the other things that go into it. There are so many redundant programs in that whole agency. It's a huge agency that need to be cleaned up, consolidated, the redundancies solved. I'll tell you another interesting thing I heard from the finance commissioner. The Agency of Human Services, which is so vast and covers so many different programs, is reliant on a computer system that was put in 1983. Now, if that isn't an inefficiency, I don't know what is. There's only one person, and he's quite elderly, who really knows, really understands it. And I think when he goes, nobody's going to know what to do. That has to be updated, and it would then prove to, I think, make more efficiencies possible. Right now, nobody knows. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. We need somebody to follow some of these Medicaid people who are claiming to be Vermont residents and are not. I get calls from doctors and dentists and all kinds of medical people all the time, or it did when I was up there, that they have a Medicaid patient that drives up from New York City to be on Vermont Medicaid. They have Medicaid patients from across the state line. They have Medicaid patients who drive into their parking lot with a brand new truck and 2 new snowmobiles in the back. Something has to give, and I maintain I like to use state money as an investment. I think if we invested in some kind of a monitoring bureau, we would save much more money than it cost.
Steve, Tony, do you care to speak to the question?
Well, I can't add too much to those two ladies that just spoke. If I'm elected, I'll support whatever they do in that direction.
I think that there are redundancies. I think that part of the problem is that you're looking at line items and not looking at the whole thing. You're not looking at it like it's a household. We live within a budget in our home. If we go over a little bit, then we have to make amends and do something else. So we have to prioritize in our own home. The word economy comes from oikos, right?
Yes.
Oikos, which means household. And so I have an idea of that from the theological perspective and from just working in systems with people, with family dynamics, with communities. I know about how a household works and about how a household system works. Cynthia, you know how a household works economically. You put that together and you can then come up with some really good solutions. Some people in the past really debunked what President Carter had to say when he talked about zero-based budgeting. But there is really intelligence behind taking a fresh look. Where do you prioritize? Is healthcare the most important thing in the state of Vermont? Is the economy the most important state? They work together. The environment and the economy, they're together. It's all part of the household. You have to look at the household needs and then develop your budget around the household needs. And you do that locally, and you do that statewide. We're the best state in the union. It's just a matter of working some of these details out, and it can be done. And it can be done for the benefit of everyone. This is at least my hope, that every Vermonter has a really good opportunity here, and look at the whole thing.
Okay. Bill Dronzik, you get the last question, and then we're going to go to closing statements.
Okay, this is directed to Judy and Tony. You expressed very strong interest, support, it sounded like, for small schools. And I presume you realize that one of the reasons these schools stay in existence is because the state directs a substantial subsidy towards them to keep them going. Is it fair to the taxpayers of Manchester, for Manchester taxpayers, to be supporting these subsidies, these small schools?
I agree that is a problem. A lot of the other towns are paying for those small schools just to be subsidized so they can stay alive. If I could wave a magic wand, I would put everything back in the town's hands, because a town can raise, I could talk for an hour about this. I was on judiciary when the Brigham decision came down. The Brigham decision is very self-contradictory, and it really doesn't rely on what ended up being Act 60. That is not really the answer to the Brigham decision at all. The Brigham decision said a formula procedure is not a formula, what is it called? The formula system for funding schools is not constitutional. Act 60 is a formula for funding schools. So we have a lot of problems with the whole basis for the situation. And back in those days, a town could raise enough money to support their small school, they did. If they couldn't, they got a subsidy from the state. It was very simple. And a lot of states are going back to this method. It is a formula system, but it's based on the fact that towns can raise their own money for their own schools. They do so. They get no money, no help, no subsidies. A town that has a problem gets a subsidy from the state level. It is so simple and so clean, and it would solve that whole problem. I don't have a magic wand. I wish I did. I don't know what the answer to the small school program problem is with other towns having to pay that. I wish I did.
Does anyone, Cynthia?
I just think it's important to know that the state has studied the small school situation and which schools get the grants. And there are schools in different situations. For instance, I believe there's a school in Wyndham where it's 16 elementary kids, but they're up on top of a mountain, and it's 15 miles to get to any other school. So perhaps you can justify that subsidy. But there may be some other schools where that isn't quite so clear. So I think that one thing we might want to do is to clarify what do you need to be or to do to get a small school grant. And so that if you want to keep your small school, you may have to pay a little bit more of the cost. And this is, again, this is a brutal thing to say, but one of the problems in our system is we have this shifting of big schools with big increases. They shift their costs onto small schools, and small schools shift it onto other things. It's not right. It's not the kind of clear household budgeting that we all know we need. So I think we need to look at that problem and try to address it with the kind of compromise and common sense that Vermonters always solve difficult problems with.
All right, well, now we'll move to our final round here and allow each one of our candidates to give a closing statement for a minute or two. And I guess we can start maybe from the opposite end of where we started. So Tony, you get to go first, and for a closing statement of 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll work our way over to Steve.
Okay, well, I think the state has gotten itself into a lot of trouble, which is not too apparent to a lot of people because it's kind of buried, and they can't quite make ends meet, so they'll stuff something in the education budget, and that'll raise your property taxes, and people complain, but they'll pay. And what we really need to do is to get the state on a sound financial basis where the increases, if any, in expenditures are within the increase, if any, of Vermont income. We've had a trend here of about roughly 5% a year increase in state expenditures for the past several years when the income is 2% or less. So that is an unsustainable situation that has to be corrected. And maybe I can summarize my whole position by saying that whatever the state is doing, they're doing too much of it, and they got to do enough less to stay within our means.
Thank you, Tony. Judy Livingston.
When I was in for 14 years, I hate to call on my past record, but that's all I have to go on, really. I did my best to invest the state money, the money I was being paid, and my colleagues were being paid in events and programs that would produce more money, that would attract business or pay for themselves or offer income to and funding to various communities. I started an equine industries commission. I started a nanotechnology advisory council. I worked on state funding for geothermal installations, which, by the way, is a very clean way to heat your home, and I think it has lots of future possibilities. I co-sponsored and lobbied for several different alternatives to Act 60. I aided landlords with their tenant problems. I created legislation to allow wine tastings and amateur brewers events in the state of Vermont. There were a lot of them. I co-sponsored broadband legislation, which still is creeping around the state, but it's happening. I co-sponsored the next generation workforce development legislation. I organized legislative seminars to create an entrepreneurial incubator. Oh my goodness. I can't remember any of the rest of them, and at any rate, I don't want to bore you silly, but I would continue to do that kind of legislation to produce, if we have to. If somebody said to me, my father-in-law, Fred Eric, you all know, who was in the Senate for a long time and a lawyer, and he said, every time we pass a bill, we should pass a law, we should erase 2 others. We should repeal 2 other laws that are on the books. The state library of laws is this big, and there's a lot to think about there, and that would certainly save us some money too. But I'm for saving money, I'm for efficiency in state government, and that's what I'd work on.
Okay. Cynthia Browning.
How much time do I have?
A couple of minutes.
20 minutes.
Don't tempt me.
I know. I'm gonna get this
I would
going
like to.
again.
I would like to talk about if I am reelected, who who are you reelecting? Who would you be reelecting? And what would I be likely to do? I know that I have created concern about how aggressive I've been at opposing some of the Democrats' initiatives, up to and including doing a public records request for the governor's plans for single payer. I consider that by doing that, I was being a good Democrat, and I was asking my fellow Democrats to be better Democrats. Just one example, we did a campaign finance reform bill at the beginning of this past session. It raised all the monetary limits, raised them. Now, some of that has to do with what the Supreme Court has said, but I think it's striking that the Republicans and the Democrats didn't really want to limit money that would come to the parties. They didn't want to do that. And I consider that a real violation of what Democrats have been professing in terms of campaign finance reform. Certainly what we can do in that area is restricted by the Supreme Court decisions, but one thing we could do is have more and more disclosure. Disclosure of where someone works if they give $1,000, so that you know, is it all of the vice presidents for Green Mountain Power that are given all this money? Who is it? We need to have PACs or people who sponsor issue ads. They need to stand behind it and say how it's being financed. The Supreme Court said that, in fact, disclosure is the answer. I might have preferred other answers, but we needed to do disclosure. And I held up the bill on the floor of the House to make that case in January because I felt so strongly that the Democratic Party was letting the democratic ideals down. I don't go out of my way to find these problems. The members of my caucus appreciate the fact that I tend to point out the rocks and shoals ahead. The Speaker of the House, I've given him opportunities to tell me to leave the caucus, not that I would, but I gave him the opportunities, and he said, no, big tent. He kind of gritted his teeth when he said it, but big tent. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I believe in democratic values and the power of government to do good. But good intentions are not enough. We have to have policies that are based in reality that will actually work. Otherwise, we're betraying Vermonters and we're betraying democratic ideals. So that's a kind of lot of high-flown language, but I can tell you that I'm very sincere in it. If I go back, I will do my best to work with other Democrats and other Republicans and independents and progressives as I've done before. And I can tell you that I will always put my principles and my loyalty to you above personal political ambition. I promise you.
Okay, Steve, you get the last word.
First of all, it's really a pleasure being here tonight, and I'm very thankful and grateful for the opportunity to share a few moments. I never thought I would be involved in politics, and the only reason why I'm here is because the last number of months, in 2014, I had some good experiences. I was able to be involved with the label GMO movement and help to convince a couple of senators who were sort of on the fence to really support it and do it without a trigger clause, and said that we, the people of Vermont, wanted to know what's in our food, and that there was a huge tsunami. So it's not just me. Of course, they knew this, people have been working on this for a very long time, but I was happy to be part of that, and that was recognized by the senators and the representatives who trusted my voice. And then I got a call out of the blue from a young kid in New Jersey one night and said, hey, you know, I'm calling you because I'm concerned about special interest group money in politics and what it's doing to our country. And I said, tell me more. He said, yeah, could you talk to your senator and your representatives, your senators, about this JRS 27? It's going to be a constitutional convention. We want to have an amendment to kick out special interest group money out of politics. And so we would like you to be, would you do it? Would you talk to them? I said, absolutely. If you're talking about Citizens United and reversing it, I'm there with you. And the next thing I knew, Senator Sears is listening to me, and Jeff Wilson, and Senator Hartwell, and pretty soon, after 0% chance in February that it would even be brought up for a discussion, by May, this was passed. The first state in the Union, Vermont, passing a call for a constitutional convention to reverse Citizens United and kick out special interest money out of politics in the United States of America. The next month, California fell. I didn't do this by myself. I've never done anything by myself. It's always about we the people. So I hear a lot in politics about I did, and I did, and I did, and I did, but what I like to hear is that we did together, because that's where you get things done, by doing it together. And that's why I am sitting here tonight, because I believe that by going to Montpelier, I will enable things to get done for the betterment of the state that I choose to live in, the state that I love, and the people that I love, in a way that is going to be beneficial to us, all of us, we the people. I believe that we need to have a healthy citizenry, a healthy democracy, and a healthy environment. We live in an ecosystem. We live within the context of a household. We need to treat each other like that, rich or poor, black or white, wherever you're living, whatever you're doing. We need to look at this like a household, and I believe that we can do it, and I think that I am your best bet for that, if you'd be so kind to vote for me in the legislature for Arlington, Manchester, Sunderland, and Sandgate. And thank you for the opportunity.
Well, folks, that concludes our program for tonight. I want to thank all of you, first of all, for coming and listening and asking questions. I also, of course, want to thank the 4 candidates for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Like I said at the start, it's a high expression of citizenship to run for public office. I also want to thank Burr Burton for making the facility here tonight available to us. I want to thank our friends at GNET for taping the show. It'll be on GNET TV, I believe, in a few days, so we'll get a chance to watch it all over again. And again, thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.